Good evening, good evening. Welcome to another episode of Policing from a Black Perspective. We're going 10-8 right now. We're about to start podcast on, and we want to talk about a recent police shooting that happened between Sangamon County Sheriff's Deputy Sean Grayson, who brutally shot a Sangamon County resident named Sonya Massey. It's been all in the news. It's been all over the place. First of all, we just want to say our hearts go out to the Massey family. We're there in our prayers, and we hope that the family can get through this difficult time. Even though it's going to be difficult with it being splattered all over the news and on social media, we just want to send up a special prayer for the family at this point in time. We know it has to be difficult. But outside of that, we just want to really come together and discuss this. We'll have retired Assistant Police Chief Craig Howard, who has 30 plus years of experience as an Atlanta police officer, as well as a assistant police chief. We also have Charles D. Yarborough, who has 30 plus years of experience. He's worked with SWAT. He's also been a department trainer in Prince George's County as well. Where is that?
Metropolitan Police Department.
He's also been with the Metropolitan Police Department in DC. So we have these gentlemen here. They have a lot to say about this incident. And first of all, I just want to start off by asking both of you guys, what are your thoughts? What were your initial thoughts when this came to light, when you saw this incident? And I'll go to you first on that, Craig. I'll let you start off on that one.
Okay, I appreciate it, Todd. My initial thoughts when I saw that video of that situation, I was appalled. I thought it was just poor police work all the way around, and I was in total agreement with the use of force expert with the Illinois State Police, who investigated the shooting and determined that the shooting by Deputy Sean Grayson was unjustified, and I'm in full agreement with that.
All right. Well, what about you, Charles? What were your thoughts?
My thoughts was it was one of the most disgusting acts that I saw in law enforcement officer in regards to a shooting that I've ever seen in my 30-some years of law enforcement. And I totally agree with what Craig was saying, as well as the investigation that has taken place. It was very disturbing, and one of the things that is so disturbing about it in regards to the use of force is that it was totally unjustified in my personal opinion. And I'm quite sure a lot of others feel the same as I do.
And I would be one of those people. I'm not a police officer, but having known you guys for a while and just having been a former journalist and knowing a little bit about proper procedures when it comes to police officers answering calls and stuff like that, in my opinion, that was completely unjustified. It was as bad, if not worse, than when the George Floyd. It's equal with that one, if not worse. So, and that's coming from a perspective of someone who's not even a police officer. You know what I mean? So thank you all very much for your initial thoughts on that. So I was able to find a clip from a Chicago news outlet that I want to play real quick because it bears on this conversation, and it relates mostly to some of the precursors of trouble with this particular sheriff's deputy leading up to this particular incident. And I'll just let you guys check it out. Let me play that really quickly for you.
My driver's side door.
Did you violate a direct order
Yes.
from a supervisor about termination?
Yes, I did.
Grayson was questioned by a deputy chief and other top staff after that crash in Logan County.
Do you agree, before we conclude this, that there is a mountain of policy violations
Yes, I did.
that you committed? 7 months on, how are you still employed by us?
I don't know.
Yet he continued to get a pass over and over again. Even during the Logan County hiring process of Grayson, there were warning signs from another past employer, the Auburn, Illinois Police Department, where he worked in 2022. CBS News obtained these notes from a discussion between the Auburn chief and a representative from Logan County, where Grayson had applied for a new job. It states the Auburn chief said Grayson struggles with report writing, that he was very aggressive with getting drugs. The chief expressed concern that Grayson was too aggressive and that Grayson posted his drug arrests on Facebook. And the chief called him a bragger and was not great with evidence, left items laying around office.
The entire thing makes me sick.
Sangamon County board member Mark Ayers is on the jail committee that authorizes the hiring of new sheriff deputies. He says he was never informed of any negative notes about Grayson prior to hire, and his background was not shared with the committee.
I would never bring on someone that had that troubled past or that record.
As we have been
So, without playing the entire clip of the shooting, which we've all seen enough of, quite honestly, that was very revealing. Just that short bit of that news report, and talking about several things that had happened in his career prior to him becoming a Sangamon County police deputy. And the clip that we showed was actually addressing an incident where he engaged in a high-speed chase of a high-speed chase in traffic, and was directly ordered to not pursue the suspect, but he continued to pursue the suspect anyway, and wound up hitting a deer in the process of doing that. Which it could have been worse. He happened to hit a deer, but he just disobeyed a direct order. So let's get into a little more of the discussion. So what are your thoughts from the beginning of this incident? Miss Massey called, she reported a burglar. What should have happened in that situation? You get a call from a young lady who's by herself in the home. She said she may have saw a burglar, whatever. What should have happened?
Well, I think from my perspective, I've been on many calls like that, and I think there's a few things that the officers could have done and should have done. First of all, they were told that Miss Massey may have had some mental issues going on. They were called there to investigate the call of a prowler. So once they looked around from the outside alone, once they looked around and found that she seemed to be fine, there was no prowler in the immediate area, then from that standpoint, they could have just simply walked away. Miss Massey, we hope that you're okay. Everything's fine out here. If you need our services again.
I think what he was saying, if they needed his services to have the police come back. And I think one of the things that I saw was finding out doing the research on that call was that the family called, her mother called and said she was experiencing some mental issues that day, and not to send any aggressive officer out to the house because it may have triggered her. And the Sangamon County Sheriff's Department did the total opposite thing by sending Deputy Sheriff Sean Grayson out there, who was very aggressive with Miss Massey. Knowing that they had been told from the 911 call that she was experiencing some mental issues, one of the things they could have done is a lot of departments now have mobile trauma teams or psychiatrists or psychologists that respond out to those types of calls, because a lot of times police officers aren't trained in how to, to handle mental illness issues. And that was a perfect time for them to send some people out there with those police officers to follow up with her after they found out that the home was safe, that they couldn't locate a prowler, and that as far as the officers were concerned, she was safe and no one had attempted to break in the house. At that point, they could have cleared the call, wrote a report, and left. But they didn't do that.
Yeah, we apologize, Craig. He happens to be out of town at the moment. Are you back with us, Charles?
Yeah, I'm back.
All right, cool. You, Craig just gave us a little more information. in terms of what should have happened with the call. It should have ended, definitely should not have ended with someone being shot unjustifiably. But in your opinion, could you continue to say, talk about what you just mentioned as far as what should have happened, in terms of them calling for answering a call from about a prowler?
Right, as I was indicating, once they had taken a look around her residence and found there was no signs of any break-in, no signs of any prowler, even if they went into the home, at that point in time, all they had to do was engage her in a conversation, and Miss Massey, everything was fine.
And you were saying, Charles?
Yeah, so once they got inside, all they had to do at that point in time was just reassure to Miss Massey that everything was going to be okay. Make sure that she was all right inside of her residence, that there was no anything else going on outside that would cause any law enforcement response, and walk out. At no time did they try to de-escalate and talk to her in a manner that made her feel comfortable enough that she would have just allowed them to walk back on out, and everything would have been over. It did not need to lead to this deadly force situation, in my personal opinion, as a trainer and a law enforcement officer for over 36 years.
Yeah. So, I mean, for her to end up dead, and Craig, you had mentioned something in a prior conversation, the timeline of what happened. Could you talk about that a little bit more?
Sure. The Sangamon County Sheriff's Department received that call at approximately 12:50 a.m. and those officers arrived about 1 o'clock. And within 20 minutes of them arriving at Miss Massey's home, she was dead. And that was disconcerting to me when I saw that. And then as I paid closer attention to the video, having worked in internal affairs, and I looked at it from an internal affairs investigator perspective and as a homicide investigator. So from my internal affairs investigator, the first thing that I saw was that Deputy Sean Grayson never turned his body camera on. That was the first thing that I noticed, but the other sheriff deputy did. And I'm quite sure if we were to look at the Sangamon County general orders or procedures, then he was responsible for turning on his body camera.
Mm-hmm.
Then the second thing was the tone of voice that he was speaking to Ms. Massey, I think, was aggressive and was a little belittling, and I think it agitated her to the point where she didn't feel comfortable with them there. They never, as Charles said, tried to de-escalate that situation. So from the get, the things that he was doing, that deputy was doing, was not even in compliance with what he was supposed to be doing with his departmental procedures.
And I totally agree with what Craig is saying, as well as a trainer in regards to the use of force and also how tactics come into play. At no time did they back up. At no time did they make her feel that she was not being threatened by them in regards to them closing the distance between her and where she was in her kitchen. They could have clearly stepped back. Hey, Miss Massey, we understand that you may be a little upset, but everything's okay. And again, using a tone that was being de-escalating and allowing her to feel a lot more comfortable, a lot more safer. They were called there about a prowler. They were also entering into her residence, again, to make her feel a lot more comfortable. Once she picked up that pot, there was no need at no time for those officers to close that distance. At no time. There was no need for that. There was no need for them to take their weapons out. None whatsoever. So the fact of anyone trying to justify this based on perception or perceived threat, there was no threat. The threat was brought to them. The officers brought the threat into her, their tone of voice, and immediately going to draw their firearm in their perception of we're in imminent danger. There was no imminent danger whatsoever, none. And if they would have just stayed where they were, talked to her in a manner where she felt comfortable and walked out, Miss Massey would still be alive to this day.
So many things went wrong with this. And one thing I keep going back to in my mind is, how in the world did someone like him have a badge at this point in time to be able to actually be in a position to kill someone? Mentioning all of the prior things that had happened with him, all the different departments he had been at. He'd been basically, I think one of the reports said he was at 6 different agencies within 4 years, which means, and we just saw the clip where he was being reprimanded at 7 months on the job. He was being reprimanded, and the guy said a mountain of violations that he had committed in just 7 months on the job. But then he gets another job as an officer from that one incident. Can you guys speak to that? Why did he still have a badge?
One of the things in DC that we don't have is post standards of training, because DC is a city and all 50 states have what they call a post standards of training. So those post standards of training, some agencies are a little bit more stringent than others. The federal entity, everyone that's park police officer, works for the federal government in law enforcement capacity, has to go to Glencoe or other regional areas for the federal training center in order for them to be certified as a police officer or a sheriff in a state. And Craig can talk a little bit more about it, because PG County, because they're in the state of Maryland, they have to have a post standards of training as well. The other thing along with that is the type of training that these officers get. One of the things that I noticed is that all of those agencies that hired him, they should have been reprimanded, and then an investigation should have been done. I think one of the things you played too, Todd, was the mayor of that city did not know this guy's background. How do you hire someone and that information is not singled out and that information is not brought out so that everybody knows what we're getting? So in other words, they totally disregarded sending this information to the mayor, and they hired this guy based on the fact he was a police officer in another jurisdiction. I find that to be just totally unbelievable that that's went on like this, and nobody said, hey, we need to stop and need to have not hire this officer at all.
One of the things that he tried to pass in Congress last year was a George Floyd Act in public safety, and one of the things in that George Floyd Act was preventing police officers from leaving one department with a disparaging record and going to another department and continuously being hired. And that's exactly what we saw with Deputy Grayson. 5 departments in 4 years is unbelievable. And somebody wasn't doing a background investigation. And right now, that to me, I put on the Sangamon County Sheriff and his staff for not doing a thorough background. And he should be held accountable. And what it did was it opened up the door for that sheriff's department to face, civil litigation. They're going to be sued, not only because of what the officer, the deputy did, by the way he executed Miss Massey, but, okay, could we say a lack of training, hiring, retention? It all falls up. That was the perfect storm right there that everybody saw. But, that was one of the things that they couldn't get through the Congress under the George Floyd Act that didn't get passed last year, that officers can't bounce from one department to another, that if they've been fired somewhere else for doing something egregious, they shouldn't be an officer somewhere else.
And what Craig is saying, Todd, is so important, because it leads officers to believe that, okay, I can go from one agency to the next. Nobody's going to really check on me, and I can take whatever bad habits and bad ways of me policing anywhere that I need to go. And I think that needs to stop immediately. This needs to be thoroughly investigated. How does someone like this consistently, constantly go from one agency to another? The training, what training did he have? What de-escalation training did that law enforcement agency have? And then on top of that, was he attending the training? And if he had not attended the training, and we look into his background, there's no way in the world he had no business carrying a water gun. This is it's unbelievable that this happened the way that it did.
So I want to ask another quick question. When we saw him pull his gun, and in our mind, it was obviously unjustifiable that he even needed to pull his weapon. He didn't need to do that. where does the responsibility of the other officer whose body cam actually captured this, what kind of responsibility falls on him as his backup officer? Could he have stepped in to try to de-escalate with his partner before it got to that point? Do you think that is even a part of the police standard operating procedures, or just speak to that if you could?
He had a duty to act. The second deputy on the scene had a duty to act, to intervene. It appeared that when he stepped in the house, he had his body camera going, that he could have, talked to his partner. Hey man, let's calm this situation down. Let's back out. And as far as I'm concerned, the only thing that he did that I saw decent when he was on the scene was that he attempted to render aid to Miss Massey after she was shot, which he was required to do by law. And Deputy Grayson didn't even do that. He didn't even go to check on her or anything like that. That, at least the second deputy on the scene tried to render first aid and stayed with her until the medical help arrived on the scene. And former Deputy Grayson never rendered any first aid, which is required by law.
Well, the other thing along with it, I'm not going to let him off that easy. I think Craig gave him, and I totally think that he not only did he not step in like he should have, there was no reason for him to draw his firearm. If you think about it, when Grayson drew his firearm, his partner went right to his firearm as well. So that right there gave him the okay, well, hey, we're in a lethal force situation. So if he had not drawn his firearm, and again, if you look at the video, Grayson stepped in front of the other deputy. So that right there goes to tell you that his tactics were horrible. There was no need for him to do that at that point in time. So both of them, in my personal opinion, were just as guilty. The other officer, the other sheriff, could have left his weapon in his holster, told Grayson to back up, hey, we don't need to do this. And it is his duty to step in involved with that and get that situation a little bit better under control. There's no ifs, ands, or buts there. That vicarious liability holds with him just as well. And
this is similar to what happened with George Floyd. If we remember that day, there was another officer there, a couple of officers there.
Several of them.
Nobody stepped in and used, common sense and a reasonable judgment and say, hey, get off of him, man. Put the handcuffs on him if you're gonna lock him up. That goes all the way back to Rodney King. Nobody said, hey, you done hit him enough, get the guy up off the ground, put the handcuffs on him, it's over. So it seems like it's a repeat when we see in these situations.
Well, I think the other thing along with that too is that officers got to be called out. They got to be called out when they're sitting there watching something that they know is wrong, and they're just as guilty by not stepping in and opening their mouth and saying something. Even to the point where you step inside, put the gun down. He could have taken his hand, and man, we don't need this at this point in time. He did none of that. He drew his weapon just as quickly. And I don't know whether the Grayson was the senior sheriff at that point. I mean, it didn't matter whether he had been on it for 10 seconds or 15 years. He had an obligation at that point in time as a trained sheriff as well to step in and say something and try to prevent this situation from going to where it went to that led to the death of Miss Massey. Again, like I said, it was horrible. It was something that's just totally disgusting to me, and it's very difficult for me to even talk about this and seeing this video over that we've seen again, and how these type of situations constantly keep happening. And it goes back to three things that I always continue to say when it comes down to law enforcement agencies. You have to have the right people hiring your people, you have to have the right people training, and you have to have discipline. And without those three things, you're going to have problems within your agency. Sure, there's going to be some people that squeak by, but there's no reason in the world why this situation turned out the way that it did. None.
Charles, could you repeat those three again? I think you didn't hear the third one, but could you repeat those three things you think are very important?
Yes, sir. First is recruiting. You have to have the right people recruiting the right people. You have to be able to tell people, no, you're not good enough for our agency. Number two is your training. You can't have people that don't have experience as your trainers. You have to have people that have experience, that have been in the street, that have been sheriffs, that have been involved in incidents, that know how to de-escalate certain situations and tone things down. And number three is the discipline. The discipline has to be swift and effective. You cannot have officers out here, regardless of what their color is, gender is, what agency they work for, doing things that they know are wrong, and the agency knows that these things have to be taken care of. And the reprimanding has to be swift and effective. Without that, you can continue to have officers going to different agencies Their backgrounds are not being checked, and these incidents are going to be happening over and over again.
I agree.
Wow. So it reminds me, briefly, it just reminds me of a documentary I saw one time called Waiting for Superman. And it was about the education system and how bad teachers don't get put out of the system and fired. They just go to different schools. They keep getting bumped from school to school to school to school. And the guy who did the thing was saying the whole reason, did the documentary, he said the whole reason he named it Waiting for Superman is that it was kind of a play on words, because there is no such thing as Superman when it comes to that. You know, who's looking out for the kids if you keep passing around bad teachers? In this case, who's looking out for the general public if you keep putting officers in situations where they can kill people? You know, so that's it's just a horrible tragedy. And again, our hearts go out to the families. There was a interview that was conducted earlier this week, or last week, by Rashad Rickey on his podcast, on his show. And I've met Rashad Rickey before in some former positions that I had, and I respect him. I think he does really good work. He had two guests on his show. One of them was a guy named Brandon Tatum, who's I believe is a former police officer himself, as well as another police officer, Leon Taylor. And they had sort of conflicting views on the shooting. So real quick, I want to play a real quick clip from that so that you guys can give your opinion on what was done, what was said in the particular clip. So I'll just play the clip real quick and then we'll come back.
Let's talk about it openly. On the panel, I have Leon Taylor, Master Sergeant, United States Air Force, retired with over 20 years of experience, also a retired Baltimore police officer. And we have Officer Brandon Tatum, a former member of SWAT, CEO of 3 companies, and he is known for his YouTube channel talking about police conduct. Gentlemen, thank you both for being on the program.
Thanks for having us.
Okay. Here's what I want to do. Officer Tatum, you have taken the position that this police officer is justified. I would like you to explain your position. Then I'm going to go to our other panelists for their opinion. What say you?
All right, so I want to make sure we're clear here. Justification is not, is he justified in the death of this young lady? Justification is the justified use of force. So I don't condone any of his actions before the shooting. I don't think that he's a great officer with great reputation, and I'm not supporting him whatsoever. I'm saying that the use of force when she lunged at the police officers with the pot, the use of deadly force was appropriate and justified in that particular instance.
What, say that again?
That when she lunged at the police officers with the pot of boiling water, that Grayson was justified in using deadly force against her.
Okay. So in your, I guess, estimation of what happened, she violently attacked the officer.
No, I didn't say she violently attacked the officer. She picked up the pot and she threw it in the direction of both officers. And out of fear of serious bodily injury, which is a part of the statute requirement, they can utilize deadly force to deter that threat. And that's what Grayson did in that instance. And that's why I believe it's justified.
You know, I could go back and forth with you. I'm going to allow the panelists to opine on this because I'm sure he has something to say. Officer, what say you?
Well, it's interesting. You know, you can't legislate morality, that's for certain. But in all of this, I'm still trying to understand why they're inside the house. It makes no sense to me. If the original call was for a burglar or a suspected prowler, once they've ascertained that that's not the case, why do they need to go inside? They already know that she possibly has mental health issues. To my mind, to my way of thinking, once they established they've satisfied the requirements of the original call, you check on her, ask if she's all right. It's time to code the call to go back in service.
So we saw what the two officers said, right? Brandon Tatum said He believes that it was a justified shooting. What do you all have to say about his opinion? And he even said that the reason he feels like it was justified is because Sonya Massey lunged at the officers with a pot of boiling water. Now, we all saw the clip. Everybody in America has seen the clip. I'm not going to give my opinion. I just want you guys to give your opinion.
From my perspective, I think that's one of the most ridiculous comments that could have been made by a fellow police officer. There's no way in the world you can even think about justifying that in regards to a lethal force situation or imminent danger. Those two sheriffs had ample time to back away from that situation. They closed the distance. The pot of water is not what you would call lethal force. I understand that, yeah, you could have been burned or whatever the case may be. But the bottom line is they put themselves into that situation by moving in when there was no need to. And for him to try to justify that or indicate that because it was a lethal force situation, according to the law, these officers were justified in drawing a firearm is ridiculous. That's my personal opinion about it. And based on my training and years of experience that I have, there's no way that any law enforcement officer can with any weight or goal, say that that was a justified shooting or justified use of force, in my personal opinion. I think it was ridiculous.
I agree with Charles. I agree with Officer Leon Taylor with his comments and the things that he said in reference to that entire situation. Mm-hmm. Brandon Tatum, I totally disagree with everything he said. And if that's the way he goes about policing, I would not want that him coming to any call in my city or county or wherever I live, because to me, he's just as much a liability of what he said as Deputy Grayson.
Well, the other thing along with that too, Todd, is go back to training. Just because you can, it doesn't mean that you have to. Just because you can, it doesn't mean that you have to. Yes, I could have drawn my firearm, but did you have to? Yes, I could have used lethal force, but did you have to? What was it so desperate at that point in time that these officers' lives was in imminent danger? Now, I'm saying imminent danger. Right then and there, if they didn't do anything, then what Miss Massey would have done would have caused them deadly bodily harm or even death. That is totally ridiculous for him to even come up with that as an excuse or a way to try to work around this and saying it was something when it got to my years of training, there's no way in the world that I could even come out of my mouth and justify anything like that. It's totally ridiculous. And I stand by that.
Tatum, why did he lie to his colleagues?
You're talking about in the former incident?
Well, he's been lying. I'm not even talking about the other incidents where we know he lied on police reports, which is official misconduct, violation of oath of office, et cetera. I'm talking about this time. As soon as his colleagues arrived, he told a narrative of an aggressive, violent individual. As a matter of fact, he said she was a crazy B word. All right. That's unprofessional, naturally, but it goes to his state of mind, dear brother. In a court of law, that goes to state of mind. If you believe you're dealing with a crazy B word rather than a person experiencing either A, a mental health crisis, or B, a possible victim of a potential crime, it goes to your state of mind.
Well, I don't think that's going to end up being relevant in this case, but I do think it was reprehensible for someone to speak like that.
Why don't you think it's relevant in this case when it's already been deemed relevant? That's why
it's not going to be relevant. They indicted him, in my opinion, because they wanted to stop the riots from happening. They didn't want people to lose their mind over this shooting that was very emotional. In the court of law, this is going to be a self-defense argument. So Grayson is going to argue that he acted in self-defense, and that's the only thing that's going to be on the table. His previous behavior. Why didn't his partner
respond the same way then?
Well, I think well, first of all, their tactics were terrible. His partner was in a very difficult position to do anything. He almost shot Grayson in the back. So these cops had a lot of things that they did incorrectly, and their tactics were horrible. And I think that's why both of them didn't respond in the same manner. But I think this is going to be a self-defense argument. That's what I'm saying in the court. Not what I feel, not what anybody else thinks, not how horrible this was. It was sad to see the woman lose her life like that.
Of course, he's going to make a self-defense argument if he's pleading not guilty.
No, but that's going to be the argument. Is he's going to argue self-defense, and the prosecution is going to have to prove that he wasn't acting in self-defense beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah, we know that.
The burden.
I agree. It was totally ridiculous, and for him to, for Brandon Tatum to even suggest that she was in any way aggressive towards the officers, much less that she lunged at them
Right.
with a pot of boiling water. One, there was no lunge that I saw in the video, and I know what a lunge looks like. Two, it's a pot of boiling water. Okay, that the officer actually directed her to go over and take off the stove or to shut it down or whatever. He directed her to go do something with the pot of water. So there's no way that you get anything other than a burn from a pot of boiling water. But to pull your gun out, that was extremely that was totally unjustified.
Well,
I
one of
think,
the things.
excuse me, I think people need to understand that as a citizen, you don't have to follow an unlawful command. And the unlawful command was go over to your stove and turn that water off, or whatever Grayson said to Miss Massey. First of all, she didn't have to comply with that. She's in her house, so that was an unlawful command that he gave her. And the language and the way he was talking to her was very, very demeaning. He didn't treat her as a person to me. He was very condescending. So just the whole way he approached that Miss Massey to me was just it was very disturbing.
Well, the other thing along with that, and I agree with what Craig is saying, and what you were saying also, Todd, is that at that point in time, she was not moving towards that. He indicated that to her by just like Craig was saying. So there was no need even. Why was the pot of water such a big concern? It wasn't. It didn't have to be. So by him saying that to her, now she puts her hands on it, and now because the way he's talking to her, she feels a certain kind of way. We cannot interview her because she's dead. But the reality of it is the officers put themselves in that situation. The bottom line to it, they could have done and backed off from that situation, stayed away from her if they felt that it was imminent danger with her grabbing that pot. There's no reason for what had occurred, none whatsoever. And I really feel bad for the family. I feel bad for Miss Massey. But those officers, and as far as I'm concerned, Grayson needs to be in jail for the rest of his life. And that's my personal opinion.
And to go into a little bit further on that, Miss Massey even complied with an unlawful command that he gave her. She complied by putting her hands up in the air as a sign of compliance, and she stated to him, "I'm sorry." Then, as she ducked for cover, the deputy fired his firearm 3 times, striking her, in the left eye. But the last thing she said to him before he murdered her was, "I rebuke you in the name of Jesus. Okay, I'm sorry." Where was the threat there?
Exactly.
So is that, that bad situation all the way around?
This is correct. Tatum, you're saying that these cops did everything wrong. They broke protocol. They are bad cops. You don't agree with their actions, but the only thing they got right was killing that woman.
No, that's not what I'm saying whatsoever.
That's basically what you're saying.
I don't think that both cops did everything wrong. I think that Grayson did a lot of things wrong. I would have liked to have seen him de-escalate in that situation. I would have liked to have seen, him do a lot of things differently. Even after he shot her, I would like to see them at least give an attempt to render aid, even though they wasn't going to be able to
once again,
properly render aid. But I think that being a bad cop doesn't mean that you're not justified in defending yourself against a person hurling boiling water. I think that's what it's going to end up coming down to.
Yeah, I didn't see a hurling of boiling water.
He did. I sent your staff the video that I did. I think we're sending over now. It's a video that I did where I put it in slow motion and I show the trajectory of the pod and the way the water went out and it hit a table. It hit like a chair and the floor. And so you can see that the water was hurled and propelled in their direction. And that's when he pulled the trigger and shot her. Listen, if she hadn't thrown that water, I think that these cops would, at least Grayson would have not have been justified and he would have gotten charged correctly. But I think when she threw that water, he's going to have a justification in the necessity to use deadly force in his self-defense, the defense of himself. I got to go to Officer Taylor.
Officer Taylor, what say you to that?
Well, I understand the law and I understand self-defense. And, every day in this country, officers respond to these sort of calls. And I've never heard of hot water being used as a weapon that justifies the use of deadly force. To my way of thinking, they could have mitigated the whole thing. Number one, they didn't have to be inside the residence with her. That's number one. Number two, if they were going to be in the residence, you've got an officer primary and you got a backup officer. If you're so concerned about the possibility of a fire breaking out, and you have this woman who you've already established has mental issues, she's seated. Why not have your partner go and turn the pot off? If it's that big of a deal. Again, I still don't understand why they were both inside the residence asking for her ID.
I can explain
they're trying to run her for warrants or whatever.
I can explain that.
Yeah, and Craig brought up a very good point. If you break this whole thing down, where was their empathy? Where were they listening? Why weren't they responsive to what she was immediately from the standpoint that she had some mental things going on? So why is it that they felt that at that point in time there was any threat whatsoever that she was going to harm them? She didn't have a butcher knife. She didn't have a hatchet. She didn't have a bat. She had a pot of water. That does not, by no means a stretch of the imagination, justify them pulling their firearms out and then shooting this woman and killing her. None whatsoever. It's just.
I want to just add one other thing to that. And over my career, I came in contact with police officers that I truly felt that certain people they came in contact with in the community weren't human beings, or that they didn't have feelings, or that they weren't people by the way they treated them, the way they talked to them. I've seen officers walk into people's homes. Maybe their house is not as nice as the officer's house where he lives, and look down on them. And people know when you come in their house and you looking around as if, man, what is this? And from everything I saw, he did not look at Miss Massey as if she was a human being. And that's why when he killed her, he showed no remorse. And to the point of he almost walked out the house like, so what? It was as if he shot a deer on the side of the road. That's the way I saw it, and the little compassion that he showed for her life. And I've dealt with police officers like that before.
And he even made a comment. That he said the chick is crazy or something like that.
Right. Said, and then there's another. I'm sorry, Todd. There was another commentary also. Candace Owens, she came on and she indicated that all police officers are human beings. Okay, we know that, and that was a mistake. There was no mistake there. He intentionally did what he did. At no time did he say, "I'm sorry." No time did he show any empathy whatsoever. And for her to even come out and say something like that was totally irresponsible and ridiculous. That it was a mistake. It was no mistake. He knew exactly what he was doing. And she has a tendency of coming out talking about things that she has no knowledge of whatsoever. And the reality of it is again, stay in your lane when it comes down to certain things in regards to law enforcement and understanding what the use of force is. And also those three things that I talked about. Again, when you talk about law enforcement, you have to make sure that you are recruiting the right people. You got to train them correctly, and also the discipline. And the training is one of the most important parts of it as it relates to these officers going out here and being responsible for their actions and being held accountable for the things that they do.
And I want to add one thing, Todd, to that part about the discipline. You can also put in the word chastisement for discipline, the way you have to chastise your children. You can learn by being disciplined and chastised. You know what I mean? When you make a mistake and you're just like, okay, I didn't quite get it, or I understand now. If you don't discipline people, that's when you have all kind of chaos in your house, in the streets, or on the police department. And then as we discussed a while back, a police department is just a microcosm of a community and society. And that's what we're seeing.
And one of the things, just to follow up on what Craig was saying, I think that scenario-based training is of the utmost importance. If you look at that situation, if you look at George Floyd's situation, how many agencies reenact something similar to that and see what the officers do. We do it a lot of that with the MPD, Metropolitan Police Department, when I was there at our training facility. So scenario-based training is of the utmost importance. You have role players there. You have people that now you have to put these officers under some stress to see how they handle themselves and what reaction they get. And then, just like Craig was saying, okay, did you think about this? Could you have done this? To give them something else to think about other than just going to their firearm and immediately thinking that their life is in imminent danger. And there are times when there's no question about it. But at this point in time, based on what we saw on the video from the time these officers arrived there was no reason whatsoever to use their firearms and to kill Miss Massey the way she was killed.
And Todd, there is a thing called the theory of escalating force. He had tools at his disposal. First thing, verbal commands. Second things, hands-on. He could have grabbed her, to take the pot from her or whatever, if he had to go hands-on with her. Next thing, he probably had pepper spray on his belt, that he could have used to spray her with that if he thought that she was that much of a threat. I'm quite sure he had a taser on, you know what I mean, as we go up the theory of escalating force. The last thing that he could have used was his firearm. And he went straight to the lethal tool, and he showed total disregard for his training. If he got that on the theory of escalating force.
Mm-hmm. Tragic, very tragic, very tragic. And to understand also that they even knew, and her mother, like you said, had called the department and said she may be having an episode of some sort, a mental episode of some sort. Automatically that should have caused a little bit of empathy with the officer to understand that this person may not be there all the way mentally. And quite honestly, from what I saw, I didn't see her do anything that would even indicate that she had any kind of a mental disorder or anything like that, in my opinion. Again, I wasn't on the scene. However, just what I saw from the video, I would not have thought that she had anything mental going on with her. Just by the way she reacted, she was nice with the officers. She appeared that she probably did feel a little threatened, I would imagine, from two big guys in her big officers in her home. But I didn't see anything on her part that would justify even being disrespected in the way that he talked to her, much less being shot. Just tragic. And one thing I want to clarify. I mentioned Rashad Rickey's show earlier, and I understand that the guests that he has on his show do not reflect his opinions or the opinions of his show. I just want to clarify that. I just mentioned him as someone who had hosted an interview, which I'm glad he did that interview, because it shows a lot about the differing opinions that people have when it comes to how things should be done right, how things should be conducted in terms of police, and how we should be policed. But one thing reigns supreme, and that is the letter of the law. The law states that the people are to be dealt with in a certain way, with a certain level of respect. And when an officer of the law goes outside of that, they should be punished to the utmost extent of the law, especially in a case where they take a human life in an unjustifiable way and show complete disregard for that person's life. That is the ultimate infraction. And I agree. I think that he should spend the rest of his life in prison. That's what I think. So there you have it, folks. Another episode of Policing from a Black Perspective. Do you guys have anything to add before we go?
I'm good.
No, I think we let people know where we're coming from with this, Todd. And I think that, again, our condolences to the family, Miss Massey, God rest her soul. And again, as far as this situation concerned, and Craig and we totally agree that there's no reason for this, none whatsoever. And again, I hope that, and I hope and pray that that officer definitely, Grayson, goes to jail for the rest of his life, and he needs to be held accountable. And as long as those agencies that hired him as well, they need to be held accountable too. Absolutely.
There's no way he should have been still wearing a badge and working for a law enforcement agency. There's no way. There's no way they're around. They can't explain that away. There's no way they can do that. So With that, thank you all for joining us for another episode of Policing from a Black Perspective. You see our phone number scrolling along the bottom of the screen. If you have a show idea or an issue that you think we can discuss, give us a call at 470-924-1790 or visit our website and send us an email at policingfabp.com. Again, this is Policing from a Black Perspective, and we're going 10-8. Until we see you next time, God bless you, and we'll see you soon. Good night.
Good night.